Welcome aboard the journey of Legacy of the Clock, where stories are navigated with the precision and heart of StoryWave AI. Chart this course with us by liking, sharing, and subscribing for daily explorations. Chapter 1: The Unveiling of Time. Pulling back the heavy cloth, I revealed an intricate clock, its gears exposed, unlike any timepiece I had seen. The mechanics were not just complex, they were unfathomably ancient, crafted from materials that didn't reflect the light quite right. I leaned closer, my curiosity piqued by the engravings on the metallic surface, symbols that seemed to whisper secrets of times long past. Timothy, my childhood friend who had become my confidant in these adventures through the dusty remnants of our ancestors, stepped beside me. His voice broke the silence. "Do you think this could be what your great-grandfather hinted at in his journals? The key to—" I nodded, though hesitance shadowed my thoughts. It might be, but messing with time is dangerous, I know. Timothy's words were quick, clipped with the precision of one who has weighed risks and rewards 1,000 times over. But think of what we could learn, the mysteries we could unravel. The air in the room felt charged, as if the unveiling of the clock had stirred something elemental. The hands of the clock began to move on their own, slow at first, then with increasing purpose. As they spun, a soft hum filled the room, growing louder, resonating with a frequency that seemed to echo through the very walls. "Look at this," Timothy murmured, pointing to a series of inscriptions along the base. "These are not just decorations, they're coordinates, dates, timelines." My mind raced as I processed the implications. Each turn of the clock's hands could represent a shift in history, a butterfly effect initiated by the smallest change. The power to alter the past was now literally at our fingertips. Yet, the weight of responsibility bore down on me. This was not merely a tool, it was a gateway, and with each journey we risked unraveling the fabric of our reality. Personal truths, hidden connections among the lines of our families, what would we discover? What might we destroy? Timothy's eyes gleamed with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. We need to test it to see how it works. There's so much at stake, yet so much we could correct, improve. I knew he was right, yet I couldn't shake off the dread of unknown consequences. As custodians of this artifact, our choices could mend or shatter the delicate threads of time. With a deep breath, I adjusted the coordinates, the dates lining up with a significant moment in history. The clock's mechanisms responded, gears turning with a life of their own. "Ready?" Timothy asked, his hand hovering over the activation lever. "As I'll ever be," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. With a shared nod, Timothy pulled the lever. The room spun, reality blurred, and time bent around us. The adventure had begun, driven not just by the legacy of a family, but by the intertwining of fates, as we stepped into the echoes of time, uncertain yet unyielding. Chapter 2: First Tick. Adjusting the high collar of my coat, I blended into the crowd, my gaze catching on the intricate architecture of the buildings that lined the streets. The clock, strapped securely to my wrist, hummed quietly, a constant reminder of both the power and the burden I bore. My steps took me instinctively toward the heart of the city, where the historical event that would define this era was unfolding. As I navigated through the throng, my attention was caught by a figure standing beside a stall selling newspapers, her eyes sharp and scanning the crowd. Her silver hair and the clockwork-patterned cloak she wore marked her distinct from the rest. It was she, Victoria Morn, known in our time as the Time Thief, but here merely a passionate chronicler of events. Our eyes met, and a flicker of recognition, or was it suspicion, crossed her face. She approached, her gait measured, her voice carrying a clear, melodic tone that commanded attention despite its softness. "You seem out of place, sir," she began, her blue eyes narrowing slightly. "Your garb is unusual, your accent unplaceable. What brings you to this part of London at such a critical juncture in our history?" I had to tread carefully. My response could not betray my true purpose. "I am but a traveler, madam, drawn to the heartbeat of innovation and change. Today marks a significant moment, does it not?" "Indeed," she replied, her gaze still piercing. "But a traveler with such keen interest in our affairs suggests more than mere curiosity. What is it that you seek?" The clock on my wrist gave a soft, almost imperceptible tick, a reminder of the thin ice upon which I treaded. Knowledge, madam, the kind that can only be gained by witnessing the turning points of history firsthand. Her lips twitched in what could be a smile or a sneer. Be wary, sir. Some knowledge can change the course of one's life, or many lives, depending on its power and reach. As we spoke, the crowd's din grew louder, the air charged with anticipation and the imminent sense of change. I could see the subtle shifts already, the way people's decisions altered just by my mere presence. A man who might have left turned to stay. A woman hesitated in an alley, watching us with curiosity. Your words are heavy with truth, I conceded. One must indeed be wary. Victoria nodded, her eyes still fixed on me with an intensity that seemed to see through time itself. Then tread lightly, traveler. History is a fragile hodgepodge, and we are but threads within it. With that cryptic warning, she turned back to her observations, leaving me to ponder the dual edges of my mission. As I walked away, the clock's ticking seemed louder, synchronizing with the heartbeat of a city on the brink of transformation. Each step I took was a stitch in the fabric of time, each decision a potential unravel of centuries-old threads. With the weight of history on my shoulders, I moved forward, ever aware of the eyes that might still be watching. Chapter 3: Echoes of the Past. Navigating through the crowded marketplace, I was acutely aware of the watch ticking softly at my wrist, its steady rhythm, an obvious variance to the chaotic lifeblood of the city. My purpose here was singular: seek answers about the clock's origins, planted deep within the sands of time. Yet, every step felt heavy with the weight of unseen consequences. At the heart of the forum, I encountered Gaius, a scholar whose reputation for wisdom was known even in my own time. His sharp gaze met mine as I approached, and the understanding in his eyes suggested he perceived more than he let on. Greetings, traveler, Gaius began, his Latin crisp and clear. What quest brings you to the heart of our republic? I chose my words with care, knowing they could ripple through history. I seek understanding about time itself. There are mechanisms, devices crafted to measure and perhaps manipulate its flow. Gaius studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Time is a river, he finally said, and many have wished to navigate its currents. What is it you hope to find in these waters? Treasures or truths? The latter, surely, I replied. Truths about how such power should be wielded, if at all. A murmur ran through the nearby crowd, a reaction to a sudden commotion at the edge of the forum. A figure prominent in historical accounts but whose fate was meant to be sealed later stumbled, clearly in distress. Without thinking, I moved through the crowd, reaching the figure just as he faltered. My hand steadied him, an action benign yet fraught with potential ramifications. Gaius watched, his eyes now wide with a mix of curiosity and concern. Your actions, he said quietly as I returned to his side, they are like stones cast into the river. See how the ripples expand, reaching far beyond the point of impact. I did not mean I started, but Gaius raised a hand. Intention is but one facet of action, he interjected. The river cares not why the stone was cast, only that the waters have been disturbed. The weight of his words settled over me as I pondered the unintentional change I might have wrought. The figure I had aided was key to many events, and even the slightest alteration to his story could rewrite history in unforeseeable ways. Perhaps, Gaius continued, his voice now barely above a whisper. The question is not solely of how to wield this power, but why it exists at all. What lessons are to be learned from the capacity to reshape the past? The marketplace around us seemed to slow, the voices and sounds dimming as I considered his words. The clock at my wrist ticked on, indifferent to the philosophical quandaries it inspired. Thank you, Gaius, I said finally, the decision firming within me. Your insights are as sharp as they are profound. I must consider carefully the path forward. As I left the forum, the weight of the clock on my wrist felt ever more significant. Each tick seemed a solemn reminder of the delicate threads of time woven through the loom of history and the responsibility entwined with each pulse of its gears. Chapter 4: Shadows over Time. I moved toward the bookshelf, my fingers tracing the spines of books that seemed unfamiliar. Titles and authors I didn't recognize stood proudly where my favorites once resided. It was a small change, seemingly insignificant, but it was a glaring sign that the threads of time had been pulled too taut, altered by my own hands. The door to my study creaked open, and my colleague Marcus entered. His usual jovial demeanor was replaced by a furrowed brow and a cautious gait. "Timothy," he began, his voice tinged with a confusion that mirrored my own, "have you noticed anything peculiar today? The news speaks of events I can't recall ever happening." I nodded, my mind racing as I tried to piece together the fractured reality. "Yes, Marcus, it appears our actions in the past have started to echo into our present, reshaping it in ways we might not have anticipated." Marcus paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "This is troubling. The implications could be catastrophic if we're not careful. What if we've changed something fundamental, something that could not be undone?" The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. "We need to understand the extent of these changes, Marcus. Perhaps there's a pattern or a clue that could help us navigate this altered reality." Together, we pored over newspapers, digital archives, and personal journals, searching for discrepancies, for events that neither of us remembered. It was during this search that a realization struck me like a cold wave. "Victoria," I muttered under my breath. She had been in the periphery of my travels, a shadow that loomed ever larger with each journey. Her intentions, once shrouded in mystery, now seemed pointedly clear. She was not just a passive observer. She was an active participant, altering events to suit her own unknown ends. Marcus stopped his rummaging and looked up. "What about her? Do you think she's behind this?" "It's the only explanation that fits," I replied, the pieces of the puzzle slowly aligning in my mind. Each alteration, each shift in the fabric of our reality might be her doing, or at least influenced by her actions. "We need a plan, Timothy. We can't let her wield this power unchecked. The consequences are too great." I leaned against the desk, the cool wood grounding me as I thought through our options. "We track her, Marcus. We use the clock to follow her movements through time, to predict her next steps, and to counteract her changes." Marcus nodded, his expression resolute. "It's risky, but it might be our only chance to restore order to the chaos we're facing." As we set our plan into motion, the clock on my wrist ticked on, a constant reminder of the relentless march of time and the delicate dance of cause and effect. With each tick, the shadows over time grew longer, the path forward more treacherous. Yet, with resolve, albeit tinged with uncertainty, we pressed on, knowing that the legacy of the clock was not just to traverse time, but to safeguard it. Chapter 5: The Principles of Paradox. Elias, with his deep-set eyes and a beard that seemed to have absorbed the dust of centuries, leaned against a mahogany table scattered with maps and ancient instruments for measuring the heavens. He fixed his gaze on me, and in that gaze, I felt the weight of knowledge too vast for one lifetime. "You seek to master the streams of time, young traveler," Elias began, his voice echoing slightly off the stone walls. "But do you comprehend the fabric you attempt to weave and unweave with each turn of your clock?" I shifted uncomfortably, the leather of my boots creaking slightly underfoot. "I understand there are risks, consequences to even the smallest ripple. But surely there must be a way to navigate these streams without succumbing to the whirlpools." Elias chuckled, a low sound that filled the room like the rumbling of distant thunder. "Ah, to navigate without disturbance. That is a craft few have ever mastered. Each thread you tug, every strand you pull, these are not merely actions. They are choices, each with its own shadow, its own echo that reverberates through the corridors of what was, what is, and what could be." He walked slowly around the table, his fingers tracing the edges of a celestial globe that glowed faintly under the dim light. "Consider this," he continued. "Each decision you make with the power at your wrist does not merely alter a single event. It reshapes the landscape of history itself. A landscape where mountains can be made from molehills and oceans drawn from puddles." My mind raced as I processed his words, the reality of my power settling into my bones like a cold dread. "But how does one choose which thread to pull, which path to tread?" I asked, my voice a mere whisper amongst the echoing ticks of the clocks. Elias stopped his pacing and looked at me, his eyes sharp yet not unkind. "That, my dear boy, is the question that every wielder of our art must answer for themselves. But know this, the principles of paradox are unforgiving. Each action has its reaction, each cause its effect, no matter how noble the intent. He gestured to a large tome on the table, its cover embossed with symbols that seemed to shift and change as I watched. Within these pages are accounts of those who tried to bend time to their will. Some sought to correct injustices, others to gain power or to save loved ones. Each tale is a lesson in the delicate balance of our craft. I approached the table, my hand hesitating above the tome. And these lessons, they will guide me? They will offer you perspectives, Elias corrected gently. But the path you choose must be your own. Remember, with each journey through time, you do not merely walk through history, you are part of its making. And each step, each breath, each heartbeat is a note in the symphony of existence. As I opened the tome, the pages seemed to breathe, the words lifting from the ink as if alive. I realized then that my journey through time was not just about exploring the past or foreseeing the future. It was about understanding the intricate dance of cause and effect, of choices and consequences, woven through the shuffle of time by the hands of countless travelers before me. With a newfound respect, tempered with a healthy dose of fear, I began to read, knowing that each page turned was a step deeper into the labyrinth of time. Each word absorbed a spark that could light the way or set ablaze the very threads I sought to understand. Chapter 6: Tangled Threads. The marketplace of medieval Paris sprawled before me, a turmoil of colors and sounds assaulting my senses. Here, amidst the clamor of vendors and the stench of livestock, I had once made a choice, a seemingly trivial act that had unspooled the threads of countless lives. I navigated through the throngs, my mission clear yet fraught with the complexity of unintended ripples. My objective was to locate the young artisan I had once advised, whose innocent craft I had unknowingly twisted to darker purposes. "Ah, monsieur," greeted Jacques, the artisan, his face lined with the hardships of years that should not have been. His workshop, once a vibrant hub of creativity, now bore the marks of decay and neglect. "Jacques, I've come to rectify the past, to undo the knots I've tied in your fate," I stated, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. He paused, his hands still stained with the ink of his trade, shaking slightly. "And what brings you back, monsieur?" "To weave new threads into the patchwork of my life. Each of your solutions in the past has but led to greater tangles." I sighed, the weight of his words grounding me more firmly in the reality of my quest. "I understand the repercussions now, the intricate interplay of each thread. Allow me to amend the weft of these entanglements." Jacques led me to the back of his shop, where the remnants of our last encounter lay scattered like relics of a bygone era. Together, we examined the tapestries, each a testimony to a choice made under the shadow of my influence. "You see, monsieur, your intentions, though noble, wove discord into my life's work. Look here," Jacques pointed to a conglomerate, its pattern marred by discordant colors and uneven textures. "It was not my intention to lead you astray. Let me assist you in restoring the harmony of your art," I offered, my hands ready to mend what had been broken. As we worked side by side, the threads began to realign, the patterns emerging clearer and more defined. Yet, with each correction, new discrepancies appeared, as if the fabric itself resisted our attempts to impose a revised narrative. "Monsieur, it seems the more we try to straighten these threads, the more they twist and turn," Jacques observed, a note of resignation in his voice. I paused, the realization dawning upon me that each intervention, each alteration of the timeline carried its own cascade of effects, each more unpredictable than the last. "It appears, Jacques, that our efforts, however well-intended, are themselves part of the problem. The fabric of time, once unraveled, cannot be rewoven without retaining some memory of its initial state." Jacques nodded, his expression somber. "Perhaps, then, it is best to let the threads lie as they fall, to embrace the imperfect patterns as part of a greater design." As I left Jacques to the quiet solitude of his workshop, the echoes of our conversation reverberated through the cobbled streets. The clock in my hand, its ticking now a solemn reminder of the burdens it bore, felt heavier than when I had arrived. With each step, I contemplated the profound complexity of time's patchwork, each thread intertwined with infinite possibilities, each choice a delicate balance between creation and chaos. Chapter 7: A Tapestry of Time. I had returned to this era with a purpose that gnawed at my resolve. Before me lay the opportunity to alter the fate of a loved one, a figure doomed by historical record but cherished in the hidden chambers of my personal history. The ancient clock, secured on my wrist, ticked in what seemed an admonishing rhythm, a reminder of the rules I dared to defy. As I navigated through the crowded thoroughfare, I encountered Dr. Harrow, a historian of considerable repute and a fellow traveler in the realms of time. His sharp features were etched with the academic rigor of his profession, and his eyes, though keen, held no warmth of recognition as they met mine. "Timothy, your presence here is ill-timed," Dr. Harrow remarked, adjusting the rim of his spectacles with a precision that matched his scholarly demeanor. "The fabric of our shared reality grows ever more delicate, frayed by the intentions of those who traverse its weave." His words, though devoid of emotion, struck a chord. "I understand the risks, Doctor. Yet here, now, I face a dilemma that challenges the very principles we uphold. To save a life entwined with my own past at the cost of historical truth, can the moral scale truly lean unequivocally in favor of the abstract?" Dr. Harrow's expression remained impassive, his voice steady as the ticking of the clock. "What you propose risks more than a single thread, Timothy. Imagine the cascade, the unraveling that could follow from saving one at the expense of many. Our actions here are not mere stitches in time, but potential unravelings of the weave itself." We stood amid the swirl of Victorian life, the air around us thick with the coal smoke and the cries of street vendors. "Consider this," he continued. "Every intervention carries its shadow, a darkness cast long into the fabric of history. How many shadows are you willing to cast to save this one light?" His question lingered in the damp air, mingling with the fog that rolled in from the Thames. I pondered the paths before me, each a potential alteration in the grand design. "Doctor, might there not be a way to balance the scales? A minor adjustment, precise and calculated, to spare one life without a significant historical footprint?" I ventured, my mind racing to find a solution that could satisfy both heart and duty. Dr. Harrow paused, his gaze drifting towards the river, reflecting the flickering lights. "Perhaps," he conceded after a moment, "but such precision requires a deep understanding of the consequences, an understanding we are still grasping at like shadows in the fog." With a nod of acknowledgement, I turned away, the weight of decision anchoring me to the spot. The clock on my wrist, an ever-present reminder of the passage and power of time, seemed to pulse more urgently now. As I made my way back through the crowded streets, the voices around me faded into a backdrop against the internal debate that raged silently within. Each step was a tick of the clock, each tick a reminder of the looming decision. The course of history and the weight of personal loss battled within the confines of my resolve, each as compelling as it was cruel. In the shadows of time, I stood, a traveler at the crossroads of history and heart, my next move uncertain but irrevocably significant. Chapter 8. A Simple Change. Navigating the cobblestone streets, I reached the mill just as the evening shift was ending. Workers, unaware of the impending disaster, filed out, their faces etched with the day's toil. Hidden from view, I made my way to the back, where a forgotten lantern flickered dangerously close to a pile of fabric scraps. As I adjusted the lantern, ensuring it was a safe distance from any flammable material, I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I found myself face to face with Mr. Hawthorne, the mill owner, his countenance marked by surprise and suspicion. "Good evening, sir," I greeted him, my tone neutral. "Just ensuring the safety of your establishment." Mr. Hawthorne eyed me curiously. "I don't recall seeing you around these parts before. What's your interest in my mill?" The question was pointed, and I chose my words carefully. "I'm merely a concerned citizen. Fires are no trivial matter, and prevention is everyone's responsibility." His gaze lingered on me for a moment longer before he nodded slowly. "Indeed, you are correct. However, this mill has stood for decades without incident. Your caution, though admirable, seems overly cautious." I smiled thinly, the irony of his statement not lost on me. "Perhaps, sir, but one can never be too careful. A simple spark can lead to disaster," Mr. Hawthorne conceded with a grunt, turning to leave. "Well, I thank you for your vigilance. Good evening." With the immediate danger averted, I retreated to the shadows, the clocks ticking a soft echo in the stillness of the night. As I made my way back through the town, I pondered the ramifications of my actions. The fire I had prevented was meant to inspire a community safety initiative, a legacy of preparedness that would save countless lives in the future. The next morning, I met with Eli, a local historian and an old acquaintance, at the town's archive. The walls, lined with records and artifacts, held the memory of the town's past, a past I had just altered. Eli, have you ever considered what might happen if a disaster were averted? I asked, my question hanging in the air like a delicate thread. Eli, ever the scholar, adjusted his glasses and responded thoughtfully. A disaster averted is a lesson unlearned. The fabric of our community is woven with both triumphs and tragedies. Remove one thread, and the whole patchwork might unravel. His words resonated with a truth I had perhaps underestimated. Indeed, the consequences of our actions, even the seemingly benign ones, are often far-reaching. Eli nodded, his eyes reflecting a depth of understanding. History is not merely a record of what happened. It's a guide, a series of signposts pointing toward greater wisdom. Each event, each decision, contributes to the collective knowledge of humanity. As I left the archive, the weight of Eli's words settled over me. The clock, once a symbol of control and mastery over time, now felt more like a compass, guiding me through the murky waters of ethical decisions and historical responsibility. Each tick no longer just a measurement of time, but a reminder of the interconnectedness of all events, the grand, intricate web of cause and effect. Chapter 9. Ripples Become Waves. Walking the streets, the changes wrought by my temporal interventions were stark and disorienting. Where there should have been horse-drawn carriages, there were now vehicles that glided silently along the ground, their designs sleek and utterly efficient. The people I passed wore garments of materials that shifted colors subtly with the light, their eyes frequently darting to holographic displays projected from their wristwatches. In a quiet park, away from the hum of futuristic activity, I met with Dr. Lorraine Miles, a physicist whose life I knew my actions had inadvertently altered. Her presence here, in this timeline, was proof of the ripples becoming waves. "Timothy," Lorraine began, her tone devoid of warmth yet not unkind, "your tampering with the past has propelled us into this reality. Look around you. The advancements you see are remarkable, but they come at a cost not yet fully understood." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the burden of truth. I altered an event, saved a building from fire, thinking it insignificant. But it was a crucible for innovation, wasn't it? I asked, trying to piece together the cascading effects of my actions. "Yes," she confirmed, her gaze sweeping over the technologically saturated landscape. "That fire you prevented was to destroy an old lab. From its ashes rose a new center of research, one that accelerated technological development by decades. Your intervention erased that phoenix from history, yet here we are, decades ahead in technology, but at what unseen cost?" I followed her gaze, observing a young child interacting with an advanced AI tutor, the scene both wondrous and unnerving. So the advancements, they stem from a different source now, one not born from the recoverability and determination that hardship often breeds. This timeline has technological growth, yes, but the foundational human experiences that should accompany such growth are skewed. Lorraine's explanation laid bare the complex web of cause and effect that my travels had tangled. Is there a way to rectify this? To restore the balance? She pondered, her eyes narrowing slightly in thought. Perhaps, but the solution lies not in further meddling, but in understanding the full scope of these changes. We must study this world, determine the depth of the shift, and carefully plan any corrective measures. The park around us, a blend of natural and synthetic beauty, seemed to echo her words, a reminder of the delicate balance between human intention and natural evolution. "Thank you, Lorraine. I'll take your advice to heart. It seems the journey through time is more about observation and understanding than action," I concluded, the realization dawning on me like the first light of dawn on the horizon. As I left the park, the city's pulse felt different, a rhythm altered by my own hand. The future was a record to human ingenuity, yet it stood as a stark reminder that even the smallest pebble of change can send waves crashing through the tale of history. My path forward was clear. Tread lightly and watch carefully, for the legacy of the clock was not just to traverse time, but to comprehend its infinite complexities. Chapter 10: The Burden of Legacy. The door creaked open, and Victoria herself stepped in, her cloak swirling around her like the shadows that seemed to cling to her every move. "Timothy," she said, her voice smooth yet carrying an edge sharp enough to slice through the heavy air, drafting new rules or attempting to rewrite the old ones. I adjusted the glasses perched on my nose, a gesture more for gathering thoughts than for clarity of vision. "Victoria, your interventions have shown me the necessity of establishing clear guidelines. The potential for harm is too great without them." She walked closer, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. "Guidelines or chains? You seek to bind the very essence of what makes time fluid, mutable." I spread my hands over the documents, protecting them as though they were fragile relics. "Not chains, Victoria. Rather, a compass. We need direction to navigate the consequences of our actions, lest we lose ourselves in the chaos we create." Victoria paused by the fireplace, the flickering light casting dancing shadows across her face. "And what of freedom, Timothy? The freedom to act, to change, to influence? Are you willing to sacrifice that for the sake of control?" I leaned back against the oak desk, feeling the cool wood through the fabric of my coat. "Freedom without responsibility is anarchy, Victoria. We wield a power that can unravel the very threads of existence. Can you not see the need for restraint?" Her laugh was soft, almost melodic, yet it carried a chill that seemed to cool the already frigid room. "Restraint is for those who fear their own strength. I respect the forces we command too much to bind them with your so-called guidelines." I picked up a quill, its feathered end quivering slightly in the draft. "And I, Victoria, respect the lives entwined with the threads we might carelessly pull. This is not about fear. It is about respect, respect for the past and for those who will inherit the future." Victoria turned to leave, her cloak sweeping behind her. "Draft your guidelines, Timothy, but remember, no amount of planning can prepare you for every eventuality. Time is a creature of infinite faces, and it does not take kindly to cages." As the door shut behind her, the silence settled back around me like a cloak. I dipped the quill into the inkwell, the black liquid gleaming like a promise in the soft light. With each stroke of the quill on parchment, I outlined the principles that would guide my hand, my heart, and my conscience. The burden of legacy was mine to bear, a legacy shaped by each decision, each intervention woven into the shamble of time with threads of intention and consequence. Chapter 11: The Echoes of Choice. Upon my return to the present era, the landscape of the world had shifted subtly yet profoundly. The leader I had once saved, believing it a minor adjustment for the greater good, now stood as a figure of authoritarian power, his rule marked by a steely grip over the nation's destiny. His rise to tyranny was a direct outcome of the life I had inadvertently extended. In a quiet room, lined with books that smelled of aged wisdom and overlooked the sprawling cityscape transformed by this leader's vision, I met with Meredith, a historian whose expertise in the delicate web of causality was unparalleled. Her office was a fortress of knowledge, each tome a sentinel watching over the truths of the past. "Meredith," I began, the urgency of the situation tightening my voice, "the leader I saved, his rule has evolved far beyond what history intended. His governance now alters the trajectory of an entire nation." Meredith adjusted her spectacles, her eyes reflecting the gravity of the information. "Timothy, your intervention has indeed tipped the scales. This leader, once a benign figurehead, has now morphed into a conduit of radical change. The butterfly effect, as chaotic and unpredictable as the theory suggests." I paced the length of her office, the weight of each step heavy with implication. "Is there a course of action that could rectify this? A way to undo what has been done without further fracturing the timeline?" Her response was measured, each word carefully chosen. To remove him now would be to pull at a thread that could unravel much more than his reign. The fabric of this reality is tightly woven around his leadership. The consequences of another intervention could be catastrophic. The city outside seemed to pulse with the life of decisions made, each building, each street an instrument to the power wielded by one man. So we are to stand by, to watch as history contorts under the weight of my past actions? Meredith leaned back, her chair creaking under the shift. Not necessarily stand by, but rather watch and learn. Understanding the full breadth of this change is crucial. We must analyze the ripples before casting another stone into the pond. Her analogy struck a chord, reminding me of the inherent responsibility that came with the power to alter time. And if the situation worsens, if his rule descends further into despotism, then we may need to consider more drastic measures, Meredith conceded, her tone solemn. But any action must be informed by a comprehensive understanding of the potential outcomes. We are, after all, not just dealing with the past or the present, but the infinite possibilities of the future. As I left her office, the city's lights flickered below, each one a reminder of the lives influenced by the echoes of my choices. The clock on my wrist ticked on, indifferent to the moral quandaries it inspired, a constant companion on this journey through the woven threads of time. With each tick, I was reminded that the legacy of my actions was not just written in the history books, but etched into the lives of those who lived under the shadow of my decisions. Chapter 12, A Shadow in Time. The door creaked open, and there she stood, her presence as commanding as ever. The dim light of the room seemed to hesitate around her, casting long shadows that played across the stacks of parchment and flickering candlelight. "Timothy," she began, her voice smooth and unyielding, "I must commend you. Your little excursions through time have been most productive." I stiffened, my hand instinctively reaching for the pocket watch that had become both boon and bane. "Victoria, what have you done?" Her smile was thin, almost imperceptible. "Merely taken advantage of the opportunities you provided. You see, every change you've enacted, however minor it seemed, has opened doors to power, to influence. You've been quite busy playing the hero or the meddler, depending on one's view." I braced myself against the mahogany desk, the wood cool under my touch. "You've no right to manipulate those events for your gain." "The consequences." "Consequences?" she interrupted, stepping closer, her eyes gleaming with a cold fire. "Oh, I am well aware of the consequences, my dear. In fact, I count on them. Each ripple you've caused has been a wave for me to ride." Her confidence was unsettling. With each word, it became clear that she had not just adapted to the altered timelines, but had shaped them to form a shuffle of her own design. "And what of the people, Victoria? Those lives you're gambling with?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "People, Timothy?" She paused, her gaze sweeping over the maps and charts that littered the room. "People are but pawns in the grand game of history. They either adapt or they falter. But we are the players. We make the moves that matter." Her dismissal of the human cost was stark, a reminder of the chasm between our philosophies. I knew then that I had to counteract not just the changes I had made, but also the dark currents she had unleashed. "Victoria, this isn't a game. These are people's lives, their histories. We have a responsibility." "Responsibility," she scoffed, cutting me off once more. "Your view is quaint but antiquated, Timothy. We have the power to shape history, to bend it to our will. Why constrain ourselves with notions of morality that belong to a less enlightened age?" Each word she spoke was like a bell tolling, resonating with the stark reality of our conflict. I realized then that our battle was not just over the past or the future, but over the very soul of humanity. "Then we are at an impasse," I stated, the will hardening within me. "I cannot let you continue unchecked. I will find a way to restore the balance, to mend what has been broken." Victoria's laugh was soft, chilling. "By all means, try. But remember, Timothy, in this chess game of time, I am always several moves ahead." With that, she turned and left, her departure as mysterious as her arrival. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with the weight of our encounter. As I stood there, the ticking of clocks filling the air, I knew that the path ahead was fraught with peril. But it was a path I must walk, armed with the knowledge that each step could echo through eternity. Chapter 13, Fractures. In a small, inconspicuous cafe that alternated between a Victorian tea room and a sleek, modern coffee shop within seconds, I met with Dr. Edwin Morris, a physicist whose life's work had become understanding these temporal anomalies. His appearance fluctuated with the shifting surroundings, but his focus remained unyielded. "Timothy," Edwin began, adjusting spectacles that would flicker from thin, steel rims to non-existent as the eras shifted around us, We are witnessing the unraveling of temporal integrity itself. Your travels, while well-intentioned, have propagated fractures that now jeopardize the very structure of reality. I took a seat opposite him, the chair momentarily morphing from wood to a strange alloy, then back again. Is there a method, then, to mend these fractures? A way to restore the continuum to its former state? Edwin tapped his fingers on the table, which vibrated with the echoes of conflicting timelines. Theoretically, yes, we could attempt to reinforce the timeline at critical junctures. However, identifying these junctures with precision is akin to finding a needle in a series of ever-shifting haystacks. And what of Victoria? Her manipulations have only added to the instability, I noted, the concern evident in my tone, even as I tried to mask it under layers of analytical detachment. Ah, yes, Victoria, Edwin mused, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. She sees potential where you see peril. Her actions, though reckless, are not without a certain logic. She exploits the fractures, yes, but also studies them. Understanding her methods might provide insights into solving this crisis. The notion that Victoria's hazardous gambits could be key to unraveling the tangle was ironically fitting. So we observe, we learn, and we adapt our strategies accordingly? Exactly, Edwin affirmed. We need to approach this with a blend of caution and curiosity. The anomalies you've witnessed are symptoms of a deeper malaise within the timeline. We must address the root cause, not merely the manifestations. As we spoke, a ripple passed through the cafe, a visual shudder that momentarily aligned the timelines, offering a glimpse of coherence before diverging once more. It was a stark reminder of what was at stake. Time is rugged but not invulnerable, Edwin continued, his gaze fixed on a point where the wall fluctuated between plaster and transparent composites. We must tread carefully, for each step we take echoes through the ages. The solutions we seek must be crafted with the precision of a watchmaker and the foresight of a historian. Leaving the cafe, which now settled momentarily into its Victorian guise, I stepped back into the shifting streets with a new sense of purpose. The task was monumental, perhaps the greatest challenge I had faced. But with the fabric of reality at risk, the necessity of our success was as clear as the danger of our failure. Each step I took was a commitment, not just to repair the past, but to safeguard the future. As the city flickered around me, blending epochs into a dissonant symphony, I knew the journey ahead would be fraught with peril. Yet the path to redemption lay through the heart of the storm, and I was ready to face whatever awaited in the echoes of time. Chapter 14, Allies and Adversaries. The first to approach me was Dr. Eliza Harcourt, a physicist whose own experiments with temporal mechanics had once rivaled my own efforts. Her attire, a blend of Edwardian flair and contemporary fashion, spoke volumes of her journey through the ages. Timothy, she began, her voice a calm cascade of resolve, your endeavors have not gone unnoticed. The fabric of time weaves a complex scramble, and your threads have crossed with many others. Beside her stood Jens, a taciturn figure whose lineage traced back to the Viking Age, now displaced in time. His broad shoulders and the faint etchings of Norse tattoos peeking out from under his shirt were stark reminders of the anachronisms we faced. We've seen the upheaval your actions have spurred, Jens added, his tone as steady as his gaze. The past isn't a mere playground for historians or tyrants. It's a living, breathing entity that resists being shackled. As we convened around a grand oak table, laden with scrolls and digital displays, a strategy began to form. Maria, a strategist from the Renaissance period who had mastered the art of war centuries before, outlined our plan with meticulous precision. The key, Maria explained, drawing lines and circles on a holographic map of timelines, is not only to counteract Victoria's manipulations, but to fortify the junctures she aims to exploit. We need to anticipate her moves before she makes them. The discussion grew intense, a symphony of ideas and theories. Each voice added a layer of complexity to our understanding of the temporal web. Consider this, Dr. Harcourt suggested. If we stabilize the minor ripples first, the major ones may settle by themselves. It's akin to calming the surface of a pond before addressing the currents below. Jens nodded, folding his arms. Aye, and while we mend the smaller tiers, we keep an eye out for any storms she might stir up. It's not just about patching holes, it's about weatherproofing the whole sail. The conversation shifted as each contributed their unique perspective. From the scientific to the strategic, from the subtle to the direct, our plans took shape, a blueprint of temporal integrity. As we align our efforts, Maria concluded, let us also be mindful of the shadows we cast. Each action here will echo across the centuries. We must move with care, precision, and unity. The meeting adjourned with a silent agreement, each of us carrying away a part of the collective resolve. As I left the chamber, the weight of our task settled upon my shoulders, not just as a burden, but as a mantle of purpose. Together, we had forged an alliance not just of circumstance, but of necessity, bound by the common thread of preserving the integrity of time itself. Outside, the night air was crisp, the stars above blinking in silent vigil. The path forward was fraught with uncertainty, yet the willpower forged within that room, under the watchful eyes of history's unwitting custodians, lit the way. As the echoes of our planning faded into the stillness of the night, the clockwork of destiny continued to tick, each second a stitch in the fabric of time we were determined to mend. Chapter 15, The Gathering Storm. Jens, with his imposing Viking stature, adjusted the grip on his weapon, a blend of ancient craftsmanship and modern technology. The adversary's approach, he announced, his voice carrying over the morning breeze, devoid of emotion but full of resolve. Beside me, Dr. Eliza Harcourt scanned the field with her device, a complex array of sensors and dials designed to detect temporal anomalies. The fluctuations are increasing. Whatever happens today will send ripples through the continuum. We must hold our ground. The strategy had been meticulously planned, a delicate operation requiring precision and unswerving focus. Maria, our tactician, paced before the assembled group, her eyes sharp and calculating. Remember, the goal is not just to confront them, but to steer the outcome in such a way that stability is restored. We cannot afford brute force. Finesse is key. From the opposing side, the figures of our adversaries emerged from the mist, their intentions as obscured as their forms. At their forefront was Victoria, her presence commanding even from a distance. Timothy, she called out, her voice cutting through the cold air, you persist in your folly. Control is an illusion. Embrace the chaos. I stepped forward, the ancient clock strapped to my wrist, a silent testament to the burden I bore. Chaos begets destruction, Victoria. We seek to mend, not tear further. Her laughter echoed across the battlefield, a sound devoid of joy. And yet, every repair you attempt unravels another thread. When will you see that freedom lies not in control, but in release? The dialogue hung between us, a clash of ideologies, as palpable as the clash of arms that would soon follow. Around me, my allies readied themselves, each movement precise, each gaze determined. The confrontation, when it came, was as much a battle of wills as of strategies. Our coalition moved as one, a choreographed dance of interventions and countermeasures, each step calculated to counteract the chaos wrought by our foes. Jens, wielding his axe with expert precision, managed to intercept a disruptor, a device intended to fracture the timeline further. Not today, he muttered, his words carried away by the wind. Dr. Harcourt, meanwhile, adjusted her device, aligning the energies to reinforce the weakening temporal fabric. Stabilizing now, she reported, her voice steady despite the tumult around her. Maria directed the troops, her commands crisp and clear. Flank left, hold the line. Remember, we're not just fighting for today, but for all tomorrows. As the battle waged, the air shimmered with the strain of conflicting temporal energies, the ground beneath us a token to the scars of time. Yet amidst the chaos, our purpose remained clear. When the dust settled and the last of the adversaries had retreated, the field lay eerily silent. We gathered, surveying the damage, aware that the victory was but a momentary respite. The storm may have passed, but the seas remained troubled, Maria noted, her gaze sweeping across the weary faces of our coalition. Yes, I agreed, feeling the weight of the clock's ticking, a reminder of the ongoing struggle. But together, we navigate these waters. Today, we held the line. As we departed the battlefield, the first rays of the sun broke fully over the horizon, casting light on the path ahead, a path fraught with challenges, but also with the hope of restoration. Each step we took was a step towards understanding the echoes of time, towards shaping a future where the past no longer held sway over the destiny of humanity. Chapter 16. tides of time. Victoria, her silhouette stark against the lightning sky, was waiting. Her stance was relaxed yet poised, an embodiment of the chaos she revered. "Timothy," she called out, her voice cutting through the morning chill, "you've come." I wondered if you'd have the resolve. I stepped closer, the gravel underfoot whispering tales of ages past. "Resolve isn't something I lack, Victoria. It's clarity I seek. You and we've danced around the edges of these temporal rifts long enough." She smiled, a gesture devoid of warmth. "Clarity? From chaos, you mean? You cling to order, to the hope that you can fix this. But some things once broken forge new paths, new realities." My gaze swept the horizon, where the early sun cast long shadows over the distorted remnants of time. "And what of those caught in the wake of your new realities? What of their lives, their histories?" "Collateral," she stated simply. "In every great change, some must falter so that others may rise. This is the nature of evolution, of revolution." I adjusted the timepiece, feeling the familiar weight against my skin. Evolution doesn't demand the reckless abandon of all we hold dear. We can guide change without surrendering to the tempest. Victoria's laugh echoed off the stone, a sound that seemed to warp the very air. "And there lies our eternal discord, Timothy. You seek to tame the storm, I choose to ride it." The ground beneath us trembled slightly, a subtle yet unmistakable sign of the temporal forces at play. This confrontation, it's not just about who controls the flow of time. It's about how we see the universe and our place within it. "Your way brings uncertainty, instability, and yours," she challenged, stepping forward. "A sanitized timeline, purged of spontaneity? No, I think I prefer the chaos. At least it's honest." I knew then that words would never bridge the chasm between us. This was a clash of fundamental beliefs, as much about the philosophy of power as it was about its application. Perhaps honesty lies not in the embrace of chaos, but in the acknowledgement of our responsibility to those who will inherit our legacy. Victoria paused, her expression unreadable. "Legacy is written by the victors, Timothy. Let's see what tale we write today." As the sun crested fully over the horizon, its light seemed to ignite the very air, a prelude to the battle that would decide the fate of our timelines. We circled, each step measured, each breath a calculation. The confrontation, when it came, was swift, a flurry of movements, a clash not of weapons but of wills, each parry a counterpoint to deeply held beliefs. In the end, as the dust settled and the temporal energies calmed, the landscape around us bore the scars of our ideologies, a covenant to the power of time and the depth of our convictions. As I stood over the quiet of the aftermath, the ancient clock at my wrist ticked on, each second a reminder that the battle may have ended, but the war over time's legacy would forever linger in the echoes of our choices. Chapter 17, Undoing. I found myself first in the dusty archives of a forgotten library, where once I had steered a young scholar away from a discovery that would have altered the course of scientific thought. The musty air filled my lungs as I approached her, her eyes wide with the curiosity that I once quelled. "Excuse me," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I believe there might have been an error in the interpretation of these texts. May I?" She glanced up, her brow furrowed. "Certainly, though I'm not sure what you expect to find." I leaned over the ancient manuscripts, my hands slightly trembling as I pointed out a crucial but overlooked detail in her translation. "You see, the original text speaks of cycles, not circles. It's a small distinction but vital for your theory." She peered at the text, her expression shifting from skepticism to intrigue. I hadn't considered that. Thank you." As I left the library, the scene shifted abruptly, and I was standing in the midst of a bustling industrial city. Here I had once prevented a factory accident that would have sparked labor reforms. Now I watched as the workers moved like cogs in a vast, uncaring machine. Approaching the foreman, a large man with a countenance as hard as the steel beams around us, I cleared my throat. "Sir, there have been rumors of potential equipment failure. Perhaps a brief inspection could prevent any mishaps." The foreman scowled, wiping sweat from his brow with a soiled rag. "And who are you to suggest that?" "We've had no troubles. Merely a concerned observer," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Better safe than sorry, wouldn't you agree?" He grunted, non-committal, but I saw him glance towards the most critical machines. "Maybe you're right. Better check things over than have the day's quota ruined. Satisfied, I stepped back into the currents of time, each visit a calculated step to mend the wounds I had inflicted upon the weave of history. The clock on my wrist felt heavier with each transition, a constant reminder of the ongoing struggle against the cascade of unintended consequences my actions had set in motion. Finally, I arrived back at the point where it all began, the initial misuse of the clock that had started my journey. The setting sun cast long shadows over the field where I had first discovered the power of the device. Standing there alone, I whispered to the winds of time, "Let this be right." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a subtle shift, a sense of alignment, as if the universe had exhaled a long-held breath. Though the outcomes were uncertain, the effort to correct my path was genuine. Stepping forward, the ground firm beneath my feet, I continued my journey through the echoes of time, each step a note in the symphony of history, each tick of the clock a reminder of the relentless pursuit of redemption. Chapter 18, Interwoven Paths. As I wandered through this maze, a figure emerged from the fog, a version of myself older, his features etched with lines of decisions I had yet to make. He approached, his gait steady, his eyes reflecting a history different from my own. "Timothy," he began, his voice a mirror of mine, yet tinged with the weight of unseen years. "You're at a nexus, a point where paths cross and possibilities multiply." I nodded, absorbing the gravity of his words. "I've felt the pull of these diverging roads. Each choice seems to ripple through the very fabric of existence." He glanced around, as if to ensure privacy from the unseen eyes of time itself. "These ripples, they're not just disturbances, they're messages, insights wrapped in the guise of consequences. You've seen how one small change can alter everything." "Yes," I replied, the memory of altered pasts and reshaped futures heavy on my mind. "But how does one choose the right path when every step alters the destination?" The older Timothy sighed, a sound that carried the weight of knowledge hard-won. "That's just it. You don't always get to know which path is right. Sometimes it's about making the choice that feels the most true to the moment, then dealing with the aftermath." Before I could respond, another figure approached. This one was younger, brimming with the naivety I had once possessed. His eyes were wide, unscarred by the burns of timelines gone awry. "Who are you?" he asked, curiosity painting his features. "He's us," the older version answered before I could, "or what we might have been under different stars." The younger version looked between us, confusion giving way to understanding. "And we're here to help him? To guide him through the choices?" "Exactly," I interjected. "Our journeys, while different, weave together to form the conglomerate of our shared existence. Each thread contributes to the whole." As we conversed, the threads of time seemed to twist and knot around us, the air thick with the power of creation and alteration. It was here, amidst this confluence of selves, that I gleaned the true nature of my quest, not merely to change the past, but to understand its role in the canvas of eternity. Remember, the older Timothy imparted as the meeting drew to a close, "Every interaction, every decision bears the mark of infinity. What you decide echoes not just through your lifetime, but through all the lifetimes that might ever be." With a final nod, the figures faded into the mist, leaving me alone with a newfound appreciation for the complexity of my task. Armed with their insights, I pressed forward, each step a delicate dance on the web of time, each decision a note in the symphony of existence. The path was fraught with shadows and light, but with each version of myself providing guidance, the way forward seemed a little less daunting. Chapter 19, The Last Turn of the Hourglass. Across from me, the console, an intricate array of dials and screens, flickered with the light of 1,000 possible timelines. It was here that I would make the final adjustments, here where the fate of countless realities hung in balance. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of the console, each touch setting off a cascade of changes visible only to my eyes. The screens lit up with projections of what was, what could be, and what must never come to pass. "Timothy, are you certain this is the course you wish to set?" The voice belonged to Dr. Eliza Harcourt, my longtime collaborator and friend in this temporal odyssey. Her figure, projected from another time, was steady and clear, though I knew the risk weighed heavily on her as well. The calculations are correct, Eliza, I responded, my voice steady despite the storm of possibilities raging around me. It's a delicate weave, but the threads hold. But the variables, Timothy, she pressed, her tone insistent without the warmth of emotion. One misstep, one slight error in judgment, and the weave could unravel, not just altering history, but obliterating it. I paused, considering her words. I am aware of the risks, but the potential for a stable timeline, for a reality where the fabric of time remains intact, is worth the endeavor. I turned back to the console, my hands moving with precision over the controls. Each adjustment was a calculated risk, each decision a potential turning point in the river of time that flowed endlessly before us. As I worked, the air around me thickened, the essence of time itself seeming to pause in anticipation. I could feel the weight of moments, of centuries, pressing down, a tangible reminder of the responsibility I bore. Almost there, I murmured, more to myself than to Eliza. Just one last adjustment. With a final decisive motion, I turned the dial. The room shuddered, a cosmic vibration that resonated through the very bones of the universe. The screens flared brightly, then stabilized, showing a single, steadfast timeline. Silence fell, profound and deep. Timothy, Eliza's voice broke through the stillness. What have you done? I looked at the screen, at the steady line that now represented our reality. I've set it right, Eliza. The timeline, it's stable. Her projection flickered, then solidified. And the cost? What was the price of this stability? I glanced around at the control room, at the instruments that would now go silent, their purpose fulfilled. Only time will tell, Eliza. But whatever the cost, we must believe that the future we've secured is one worth the price. As I stepped away from the console, the clock in my hand ceased its ticking, its purpose served. The room around me faded, the echoes of time settling into a new rhythm, a new order. Outside, the world awaited, its history intact, but its future forever altered by the turns of the hourglass I had dared to manipulate. In the silence of the aftermath, I knew that the journey was not over, for the echoes of our choices would ripple through time, seen and unseen, in ways we might never fully understand. Chapter 20, The Countdown. Jens, with his usual stoic demeanor, adjusted the calibration on one of the more delicate mechanisms. These adjustments, they're like trying to tune a lute with a sledgehammer, he muttered, his hands deft and careful despite his gruff analogy. Maria, who had taken up the task of coordinating our movements through the timelines, was poring over a series of maps and temporal charts. We have one shot at this, Timothy, she said without looking up. Every second we delay, the event horizon draws closer. I nodded, though I knew she couldn't see it. I'm aware. The modifications to the temporal conduit need to be precise. A fraction off, and we risk exacerbating the situation. From the corner of the room, Dr. Harcourt's voice rose above the soft hum of the equipment. The ethical implications of what we're attempting, she began, pausing to adjust her spectacles, they're monumental. We're not just altering events, we're steering the course of human history. The weight of that responsibility hasn't escaped me, I replied, my gaze fixed on the glowing indicators of the temporal conduit. But consider the alternative. A locked timeline where no change, no improvement is possible? We might as well consign ourselves to the dark ages. Jens set down his tools, his expression unreadable. There's a fine line, Timothy, between playing hero and playing God. Make sure you don't cross it. His words hung in the air, a reminder of the gravity of our task. Maria finally looked up from her charts, her eyes sharp. Focus on the task at hand. We need to synchronize our watches, ensure that every action we take is aligned. Discrepancies could be disastrous. I took a deep breath, the air in the workshop stale and heavy with the scent of oil and metal. Right, let's do one final check of all equipment. Jens, ensure the temporal displacement field is stable. Maria, confirm the sequence of events one last time. Dr. Harcourt, monitor the energy fluctuations. We can't afford a surge at the critical moment. As my team sprang into action, the clock continued its relentless march, each tick a reminder of the dwindling time. The workshop transformed into a hive of activity, each of us a cog in a machine that was racing to outpace destiny itself. The final moments were a blur of motion and technical jargon, the tension palpable. As we initiated the sequence, the room lit up with the energy of 1,000 suns, the temporal conduit coming to life with a low, pulsing throb. There it goes, I said, watching as the streams of time bent around us, the fabric of reality quivering under the strain of our actions. Whatever happens next, know that we did everything with intention of creating a better future. The clock struck the hour, the sound resonant and final. As the light from the conduit reached its zenith, the world outside the workshop seemed to pause, holding its breath. And then everything went still. The machine powered down, the lights dimmed, and the relentless ticking of the clock ceased. We stood in silence, the outcome of our actions yet unknown, the room shrouded in the quiet aftermath of our last, desperate bid for a better tomorrow. Chapter 21, Dawning of a New Era. Jens, his face marked not just by the battles of time, but by the weight of decisions made, approached with heavy steps. Timothy, the apparatus is set. We're ready to initiate the sequence. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the horizon where the first light of dawn was beginning to seep through the darkness. And the calculations, Jens? Are we certain they hold? As certain as we can be with the variables at play, Jens replied, his voice devoid of its usual fervor. It's a delicate balance, adjusting just enough to steer history without breaking it. Maria, her silhouette framed against the lightening sky, joined us. Her presence, always a flare of strategic clarity, seemed subdued. The timelines are aligning, Timothy. This is our moment, our chance to mend what was fractured. I turned to face her, aware of the multitude of outcomes that hinged on our actions. And the cost, Maria? The ripples from our intervention, have we accounted for them all? She hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. Some costs are clearer than others. Not all will walk away from this, Timothy. We knew that going in. The truth of her words settled in the space between us. This moment, this critical juncture, it was the culmination of all we had worked towards, but it bore a price, one that not all of us would pay equally. With a deep breath, I approached the control panel, the array of levers and dials that would either cement our legacy or be our undoing. Then let us begin. For those we've lost, for those we hope to save. As I activated the sequence, the ground beneath us trembled, a physical echo of the temporal forces we were unleashing. The sky erupted in colors, a patchwork of time rewoven, threads of light intertwining and parting in a dance of destiny. Look, Dr. Harcourt called out, pointing towards the horizon where the sun burst forth, its rays piercing the remnants of darkness. It's stabilizing. The event, we've altered it successfully. Relief was palpable in the air, but it was tempered by the knowledge of the sacrifices that had paved our way here. I turned to find Jens staring into the distance, his thoughts undoubtedly with those we had left behind. We've done it, Jens. The timeline is secure, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. He nodded, his response a mere whisper. At what cost, Timothy? At what cost? The dawn broke fully now, bathing us in light that felt both like an end and a beginning. As we watched the new day unfold, the legacy of our actions lay bare before us, a patchwork of time, delicate and strong, old and new. In the quiet that followed, the clock ceased its ticking, its purpose fulfilled. We stood together, watchers of a new era, guardians of a history yet to be written. Each step we would take from here on out was uncharted, a path laid in the hope of a better tomorrow. Chapter 22, The Final Hour. We stand at the cusp, Timothy, Victoria's voice rang clear, each syllable a chime amidst the storm of chronal energies. Here, where every tick of the clock is a thunderclap in the heavens, we decide not just our fates, but that of all existence. I adjusted the settings on my temporal modulator, the device pulsing with a soft blue light, a striking opposition to the harsh red emanating from Victoria's apparatus. This power, it was never meant for us to wield with such abandon, Victoria. We are guardians, not gods. Victoria laughed, a sound that twisted with the winds of time swirling around us. Guardians? No, Timothy, we are far more. We are the architects of destiny. Why limit ourselves to mere preservation when we can create? The air crackled with the clash of our ideologies, as tangible as the electric discharges leaping across the void between us. To create without foresight, without consideration for the natural order, that's not creation, Victoria. It's destruction. She stepped closer, her device humming louder with each step. Natural order? Look around you, Timothy. Time bends to our will, submits to our command. What greater order is there than that which we impose? I felt the weight of the clock in my pocket, its ticking now almost deafening. An order dictated by wisdom, by an understanding of consequences. Not this manipulation for power's sake. Victoria paused, her gaze piercing through the temporal haze. And what of your manipulations, Timothy? Are they so different? Or are you here, now, because you believe you know better? The question hung in the air, heavy and accusing. I'm here to stop you from making a mistake that we can't undo. We've seen the ripples, Victoria. We know the cost. She smirked, tilting her head slightly. And yet here you are, willing to wage this battle. Tell me, isn't that a cost in itself? I readied the modulator, knowing what was to come. Some costs are necessary, but I aim to minimize them, not ignore them. With a swift motion, Victoria activated her device, sending a surge of chronal energy hurtling towards me. I countered, the modulator emitting a field that absorbed and redirected the energy. Our visions for time may never align, Victoria, I shouted over the roar of clashing powers. But I cannot let you continue down this path. As we battled, the very fabric of the timeline strained under the pressure of our wills. The ground beneath us fractured, revealing the raw, pulsating essence of time itself. Finally, as I feared we might tear apart the continuum, I found an opening. With a calculated burst of energy, I disabled Victoria's device, halting the flow of power. She stumbled, caught off guard, her eyes wide not with defeat, but with a dawning realization. Perhaps there is a cost too great, she whispered, almost to herself. As the vortex began to stabilize, I approached her, offering a hand in truce. Let us repair this, together. Not as gods, not as rulers, but as custodians of a legacy greater than ourselves. Victoria took my hand, the energy around us calming, settling into a new equilibrium. Perhaps, Timothy, in the end, it is not about controlling time, but respecting it. Together, we set about mending the tears we had made, our actions guided by a newfound respect for the forces we had once sought to dominate. The clock's ticking softened, a gentle reminder that time, for all its power, was a companion on our journey, not a force to be conquered. Chapter 23, Resolutions and Reverberations. Approaching the central square, I noticed the statue of the town founder had been replaced by a fountain, intricate and ornate, around which children played. Their laughter was a bright sound in the otherwise solemn morning. I paused, watching them, and a local shopkeeper, Mr. Henley, approached me. "Fine morning, isn't it?" he remarked, though his tone carried a note of something else, something like perplexity. "Indeed," I replied, turning to face him. "It seems the town has undergone quite the transformation." Mr. Henley nodded, looking around with a critical eye. "Transformations, yes. Some say it's the work of new city planners, but I've lived here long enough to know these changes appeared overnight. It's unsettling." I considered his words, the weight of my actions pressing upon me. Change can often be unsettling, Mr. Henley, but sometimes it's necessary for growth, for improvement. He hummed thoughtfully, then pointed at the fountain. "That there used to be a statue. My grandfather helped erect it. Now, this fountain, it's beautiful, no doubt, but it's not what was. The past shapes us, but we must also look to the future," I suggested, hoping to ease his disquiet. Mr. Henley sighed, a sound of resignation. "Perhaps you're right. It's just hard to let go of what you've always known." As we parted ways, I continued my exploration, each step revealing more alterations, a blend of the historical and the innovative. It was as if time itself had become a painter, blending old and new strokes into a complex canvas. Further down the street, I encountered Dr. Lorraine, the town historian, her eyes wide with wonder as she documented the changes with her camera. "Timothy," she greeted, her voice brisk with excitement. "Have you seen the old mill? It's been restored, almost to its original state from the 1800s. "It's extraordinary, yes. I've noticed many such changes," I acknowledged. "It seems our understanding of history might need some revising." Dr. Lorraine nodded enthusiastically. "Indeed. It's as if history is rewriting itself before our very eyes. The implications for our work are immense. We're living in a living museum." Her perspective was a balm to the unease that had settled in my chest. Here was change, embraced and celebrated, a reminder that not all alterations bore negative fruits. As the day wore on, I found myself at the town's edge, where the old railway station, once a derelict relic, now buzzed with activity. Trains from different eras stood side by side, a tangible link between the past and the present. Remarkable, isn't it? Commented a fellow onlooker, a young man with an eager expression. It's like stepping into different times all at once. It is, I agreed, the corners of my lips tilting upward in a rare smile. It makes one wonder about the possibilities, about the paths not taken and those yet to be discovered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I returned to the heart of the town, the changes around me now familiar companions. The journey through time had been fraught with peril, with choices that weighed heavily. But standing there, in the twilight of a day that marked a new beginning, I felt a quiet hope. Perhaps, in the weaving of time's vast oddment, each thread, each decision, held the potential for beauty and renewal. And as the stars emerged one by one, I knew that the legacy of the clock was not just in the remaking of history, but in the understanding that every moment was a new chance to shape the future. Chapter 24, Legacy of the Clock. Here, in the grand library that had once been a derelict warehouse, I met with Elias, the seasoned time traveler whose wisdom had often guided me through the tempests of time. The library, with its towering shelves filled with chronicles of ages past and speculative futures, was a fitting backdrop for our deliberation. Elias, I began, the weight of my role as a custodian of time pressing upon me, the paths we've tread through time are fraught with both peril and promise. How do we ensure that the legacy of our travels serves as a torch rather than a warning? Elias, leaning against a shelf lined with ancient manuscripts, considered my question. His voice, when he spoke, resonated with the depth of experience. Timothy, the fabric of time is much like these books. Each page, each line holds potential for enlightenment or error. The legacy we leave depends on our ability to discern wisdom from wantonness. I pondered his analogy, my gaze drifting over the texts that surrounded us. And the lessons we've learned, the truths unraveled. How do we wield this knowledge with the restraint you advocate? With great power comes the imperative for greater restraint, Elias replied, his eyes scanning the myriad timelines encapsulated in the texts. Our journeys have shown us not only what can be changed, but also what should remain inviolate. It is this understanding that must guide our hand. As we conversed, the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the rows of books, each shadow a sundial marking the passage of our discourse. And of the connections revealed, the personal truths unearthed through our travels, how do these shape our legacy? Elias closed one of the tomes, a soft thud echoing in the vast space. Each connection, each truth revealed, adds a thread to the shamble of our existence. To honor these revelations, we must strive not only for academic excellence, but for ethical integrity. Our legacy is defined not just by what we alter in time, but by what we uphold. The conversation lingered as the light waned, each topic dissected and deliberated with the precision of a scholar and the insight of a time traveler. As nightfall draped its velvet curtain over the world outside, I left the library with a renewed sense of purpose. Walking through the time-sculpted streets, I reflected on the legacy of the clock. It was not merely a tool for traversing the corridors of history, but a symbol of the responsibility borne by those who wielded it. The lessons of the past, coupled with the revelations of each journey, had imbued me with a staunchness to pursue a path of wisdom and restraint. As the stars appeared, one by one, in the night sky, I contemplated the future paths of time travel. The clock, now silent in my hand, was a reminder of the cycles of learning and legacy. In this quiet hour, the echoes of all that had passed whispered of all that was yet to come, each whisper a note in the ongoing symphony of time, each note a step toward a legacy of knowledge, caution, and care. The end. Legacy of the Clock was generated by patent-pending AI technology developed by StoryWave. Any resemblance to real events, persons, or copyrighted material is purely coincidental. StoryWave does not endorse or promote any specific views, opinions, or actions portrayed in this story. Thank you for being part of this journey. Trust in StoryWave AI to transform your creative prompts into compelling stories. Show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Daily stories await to whisk you away. May 2024. Goodbye for now.